What would you do if the quietest kid in school turned out to be the one person you should never mess with? Like the video and subscribe for more content like this. Pinewood High School sat in the edge of a small Georgia town, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. The morning sun stretched across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot as students shuffled into the building, laughing and catching up on last night's gossip. Eli Mercer walked through the hallway with his head down, clutching his backpack straps like they were the only things keeping him from disappearing. Eli had always been different. He kept to himself, rarely spoke unless called on, and never seemed to fit in with any crowd. His dark curls flopped over his pale forehead, and his thick glasses made him look even smaller than his wiry frame already was. The bullies at Pinewood noticed. They always noticed, especially Wyatt McAllister and his crew, the self-proclaimed kings of the sophomore class. Wyatt towered over most kids, all muscle and cocky smirks. He played football, drove his daddy's old Ford pickup, and had a mouth that never seemed to close unless he was chewing tobacco or flashing that wolfish grin. Eli tried his best to go unnoticed, slipping down the hall like a shadow. But shadows can't hide forever. "Hey, Mercer!" Wyatt's voice cut through the hallway like a knife. Eli froze mid-step, his heart sinking into his stomach. He glanced over his shoulder. Bad move. Wyatt was already swaggering toward him, flanked by Tyler Briggs and Colt Harris. The whole hallway seemed to slow down as students leaned against lockers, waiting for the morning show. "Where you headed in such a hurry, huh?" Wyatt asked, voice thick with mock sweetness. "Science club meeting? Or maybe the library? Oh, wait, ain't nobody sitting with you at lunch anyway." A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. Eli's fingers tightened on his backpack, but he didn't say a word. He never did. Wyatt smirked wider. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or is that brain of yours just too big to talk to normal folks?" Tyler snorted. "He probably thinks he's smarter than everybody. Bet he hacks computers in his mama's basement." More laughter. The sound burned in Eli's ears. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, that familiar ache, but he swallowed it down like he always did. "Leave me alone," Eli muttered under his breath, barely loud enough to be heard. Wyatt's grin vanished. His blue eyes narrowed like a wolf catching scent of something weak. "What did you say?" he asked, stepping closer. Eli's heart pounded. He knew how this would end. He always did. A shove against the locker, his books dumped on the floor, maybe even a punch if Wyatt was feeling bold, but something flickered behind Eli's glasses. Something dark, buried deep. Nobody saw it. Not yet. Wyatt's smirk curled back onto his face like he smelled fear. He leaned in close, the scent of cheap cologne and spearmint gum thick in the air. "I asked you a question, Mercer." Eli's fists clenched tighter around his backpack straps, but his eyes stayed glued to the floor. He could feel the heat of everyone's eyes boring into him, waiting, watching, expecting him to crumble like always. Tyler and Colt snickered behind Wyatt, already picking out the perfect locker to shove him into. "Didn't your mama ever teach you manners?" Wyatt taunted. "When somebody asks you something, you answer." Eli's breath quickened, the ache in his chest twisted tighter, hotter. He squeezed his eyes shut for half a second, then exhaled slow through his nose. Not here, not yet. But Wyatt wasn't done. He reached out and snatched Eli's glasses straight off his face. The hallway burst into laughter. "Whoa, how many fingers am I holding up, Mercer?" Wyatt wiggled 2 fingers in the air, grinning like a hyena. Eli's world blurred, the edges of everything smudged and unfocused without his glasses. He blinked hard, trying to keep calm, trying to push that slow-burning fire down deeper where it couldn't reach him. "Give 'em back, Wyatt." His voice was barely above a whisper. Wyatt chuckled. "What was that?" "Speak up, genius." Eli's breathing slowed. Steady. Calculated. "Give. Them. Back." For half a second, Wyatt's smile faltered. There was something in Eli's voice. Low, cold, that didn't fit the shy kid they'd spent years pushing around. But then Tyler snorted, breaking the tension, and the moment passed. Wyatt laughed louder. "You hear this little nerd? Thinks he's tough now." He dangled the glasses just out of reach. "Come and get 'em." The whole hallway seemed to lean in, waiting for the inevitable. For Eli to snatch at his glasses and get slammed into a locker for his trouble. But Eli didn't move. He just stared. Even with the blurry edges of the world closing in, he stared straight at Wyatt, unblinking, like he could see him perfectly clear. 10 long seconds passed. Nobody was laughing anymore. "What's wrong, Mercer?" Wyatt jeered, voice a little too loud now. "Cat got your... the whack." The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Wyatt staggered back, clutching his nose, blood trickling between his fingers. Eli hadn't even blinked. For a second, nobody could believe what they'd seen. The shy kid, the kid who never fought back, had just broken the school's biggest bully with a single punch. "What the..." Wyatt's muffled shout was cut off as Eli stepped forward, slow, controlled, like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. "Give, Mr. My, glasses." The hallway was deathly silent, the kind of silence that stretched and weighed heavy like the air had been sucked out of the building. Wyatt's chest heaved, blood smeared across his upper lip. His eyes flicked from Eli to the growing crowd, kids whispering, pulling out phones, recording every second. Eli didn't flinch. He just stood there, waiting. For a moment, it seemed like Wyatt might actually back down, like he'd realized he'd made the mistake of his life. But then that hot-headed pride kicked in, the kind that wouldn't let him lose face in front of half the school. "You little..." Wyatt lunged forward, fast. But Eli was faster. He sidestepped with a smoothness that nobody expected, like he'd practiced the move 100 times in secret. Wyatt's shoulder hit the locker hard, metal rattling down the hall. Tyler and Colt blinked, unsure whether to jump in or stay back. Eli still hadn't broken a sweat, his breath steady, his hands loose at his sides. The fire inside him was awake now, clawing at the edges, but he kept it locked down tight. Not yet. Wyatt stumbled back, rage burning hot behind his eyes. "You think you're some kind of ninja now, huh?" Eli didn't answer. Didn't have to, because everybody saw it. The way he moved, the way he stayed calm, the way he wasn't afraid anymore. "You freak," Wyatt spat, wiping blood from his nose. "I'm gonna..." Eli stepped forward. One step. That's all it took to shut Wyatt up. A flicker of doubt crossed the bully's face, so quick most people would have missed it. But Eli didn't miss anything. Not anymore. He'd spent years watching, studying, memorizing every insult, every push, every time they made him feel small. They thought he was weak. They thought he was invisible. What they didn't know was that invisible people see everything. "I don't want to hurt you, Wyatt." Eli's voice was quiet, steady, cutting through the thick tension like a knife. "But I will." The words hung in the air, daring anyone to laugh. Nobody did. Wyatt's face twisted, humiliated, furious. His eyes darted toward Tyler and Colt, looking for backup. But neither of them moved. They just stood there, shifting on their feet, unsure. Because this wasn't the same Eli Mercer they'd been picking on since middle school. This was somebody else, somebody they should have left alone. Wyatt's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ground together. The whole hallway felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what he'd do next. He couldn't walk away, not in front of everyone. His pride wouldn't let him. But something in Eli's eyes made him hesitate. Those eyes, cold, steady, like they'd seen things nobody else could imagine. Eli's fingers twitched at his sides. He could feel the fire clawing up his spine, begging to be let out, but he forced it back down. Not here. Not yet. Wyatt's face twisted into a sneer, trying to save whatever scraps of power he had left. "You think you're better than me, Mercer?" Eli stayed silent. "You ain't nothing. Just a little geek who, try me. The words were so soft, but they cut through the hallway louder than any shout. Wyatt's mouth snapped shut. He didn't know what was happening. Didn't understand how the kid he'd shoved around for years had suddenly become something dangerous. But Eli knew exactly what was happening. He'd been waiting for this moment. 5 years. 5 long years of swallowing his anger. 5 years of hiding what he could really do. What he'd spent every night teaching himself in secret. Nobody had ever seen that side of him. Nobody, except his father. A fresh wave of heat burned beneath his ribs at the thought, threatening to break free. But Eli locked it down. Not here, not yet. Wyatt's hands curled into fists. He was trying to psych himself up, trying to convince himself that Eli was still the same weak little nobody he'd always been. But everybody watching could see the truth now. Even Wyatt's own friends were backing away, eyes wide. Eli took another slow step forward. "You done?" Wyatt's face flushed red, humiliated in front of the whole school. He bared his teeth like a cornered animal, but he didn't move. Eli saw it in his eyes, the crack in his pride, the fear. Wyatt tried to cover it up with another sneer, but the damage was already done. Without another word, Eli reached out and snatched his glasses from Wyatt's frozen fingers. He slid them back onto his face, adjusting them like nothing had ever happened. Then, in front of everyone, Eli turned his back on Wyatt and walked away. No one made a sound. No laughter, no whispers, just the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights echoing through the hallway. Eli's footsteps echoed down the hallway, each one slower and heavier than the last. The crowd parted for him without a word. Kids pressing back against lockers, eyes wide, phones still recording. Nobody had ever seen him like this. Not the teachers, not the bullies, not even Eli himself. Until now. He could feel the weight of every stare drilling into his back, feel the heat in his chest threatening to crack wide open. But he kept walking. Don't let it out. Not here. Not yet. Behind him, Wyatt stood frozen, hand still clutched over his bloody nose, face pale. Tyler leaned in close, whispering something in Wyatt's ear. Whatever it was, Wyatt just shook his head. Eyes locked on Eli like he'd seen a ghost. Nobody stopped him. Nobody dared. 20 minutes later, Eli sat alone at the farthest table in the cafeteria. Same spot he'd sat at every day since freshman year. The other tables buzzed with nervous whispers, stories already spreading like wildfire. "You see what Mercer did to Wyatt? He knocked him out with one punch. Nah, I heard he used some ninja move or something. I bet he's been training in secret." Eli stared at his tray, cold pizza and a carton of chocolate milk, like none of it mattered. He'd always dreamed of this day, the day they'd finally leave him alone. But now that it was here, something felt off, wrong. The fire still smoldered just beneath his skin, the same fire he'd been holding back for years. He thought standing up for himself would make it go away. It didn't. It only made it stronger. Across the cafeteria, Wyatt sat slumped at a table with Tyler and Colt, holding an ice pack to his swollen nose. His eyes flicked toward Eli every few seconds. Nervous, angry, confused. He couldn't figure out what had happened. Nobody could. They didn't know about the late nights, the basement hours, the hundreds of YouTube videos on self-defense, boxing, and Krav Maga. Nobody had ever noticed the bruised knuckles hidden beneath Eli's sleeves. Nobody had ever asked why he always walked home alone, or why he'd started training in the first place. They thought he was weak because he never fought back. What they didn't understand was that Eli had been waiting. 2 hours later, by the time the last bell rang, the entire school had heard what happened. Kids crowded the hallways, sneaking glances at Eli like he was some kind of myth come to life. But Eli kept his head down, just like always. He didn't want the attention. He just wanted to get home, before he lost control. Eli pushed through the front doors of Pinewood High, stepping into the warm Georgia afternoon. The late sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. He walked fast, head down, hoodie up, slipping past groups of students still whispering about what happened. Nobody tried to stop him, not even Wyatt. He made it 3 blocks before the footsteps started. Heavy, fast, angry. Eli's heart clenched, but he didn't look back. He already knew who it was. "Hey, Mercer." Wyatt's voice snapped through the humid air, louder now, full of fake confidence. Eli kept walking. He could hear Tyler and Colt behind him, too, their sneakers scuffing against the sidewalk. They'd waited until there were no cameras, no crowd. Cowards. "You think you're real tough now, huh?" Wyatt taunted. His words were sharp, but there was something off in his voice, like he was still trying to convince himself. Eli's pulse quickened. The fire burned hotter now, clawing at the edges. He stopped walking. Slowly, Eli turned around. The 3 boys froze like they hadn't expected him to actually face them. Wyatt's swollen nose was still red, dried blood crusted under his nostrils. His eyes flicked toward Tyler and Colt, making sure they were still behind him. They were, but neither of them looked quite as sure as they had that morning. "You got lucky today," Wyatt muttered, trying to sound bigger than he felt. Eli said nothing. He just stared, waiting. Wyatt's face flushed darker under the pressure. "You think we're just going to let you walk away after that?" Eli's breath came slow, steady. Not here, not yet. But the fire was burning too hot now. He could feel it crawling under his skin, begging to be set loose. Wyatt stepped closer, chest puffed out, trying to reclaim what little power he had left. "You ain't some kind of hero, Mercer. You're still just a freak." Eli's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You want to know the difference between me and you, Wyatt?" Wyatt blinked, caught off guard by the sudden words. Eli took a slow step forward. "You hurt people because it makes you feel big." Another step. "I hurt people when they deserve it." Wyatt's breath caught in his throat. Tyler shifted on his feet. Colt took half a step back. They could all feel it now, the storm building behind Eli's glasses. "You want another shot?" Eli asked, voice low. "Go ahead, but I promise you. This time?" His eyes locked on Wyatt's. "I won't stop." For one long second nobody moved. Then Wyatt's chest caved just a little, shoulders shrinking without even realizing it. He saw it now, what everyone else had missed for years. Eli Mercer wasn't invisible. He was a loaded gun, just waiting for someone stupid enough to pull the trigger. Wyatt swallowed hard. "Come on, man," Tyler muttered, backing away. "Let's just go." Wyatt's eyes flicked between Eli and his friends, heart hammering in his chest. Finally, he turned and walked away. Eli stood alone on the sidewalk, watching them disappear down the street. His hands were still shaking. The fire still burned inside him, hotter than ever. They'd never bother him again. But they were right about one thing. He wasn't some kind of hero. He was something much, much worse. Eli spent years hiding behind silence, letting the world mistake his patience for weakness. But when the time came, he proved that even the quietest people have limits. Never judge someone by how they carry their pain, because the ones who suffer in silence are often the strongest of all. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notification to be the first to know when the next story drops.